I was standing at Gate C-17 at Seattle-Tacoma International Airport when the airline agent looked at her screen, frowned, and quietly said, "Ms. Harper, I'm sorry, but your business class reservation has been canceled." A second later, my mother let out a soft laugh that carried farther than she intended. "Well," she said loudly enough for nearby travelers to hear, "looks like you'll finally learn what it feels like to be left behind." My father shook his head with open disappointment. "You always thought money made you important. Take a bus if you have to. Don't embarrass us at your cousin's wedding." My aunt smiled without saying a word, but the satisfaction in her eyes said everything. 8 members of my family turned toward the priority boarding line, confidently wheeling designer luggage that I had quietly arranged months earlier. Not one of them knew that every ticket, every hotel suite, every luxury transfer, and every reservation existed because of one signature. Mine. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I simply unlocked my phone, called one person, and spoke calmly. "Please remove every executive travel privilege connected to reservation group Hawthorne immediately." There was silence. Then the woman on the other end answered, "Understood." Exactly 11 minutes later, the same airline employee returned, looking far more nervous than before. She cleared her throat. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very sorry, but there has been a major change regarding your reservations." The smiles around my family disappeared one after another. None of them had any idea who had truly been carrying them all these years. For nearly 10 years, I lived by one simple rule: never answer family messages before sunrise on a travel day. Peace before chaos. Coffee before disappointment. Silence before obligation. That Monday morning should have been peaceful. Instead, my phone vibrated at exactly 5:57 a.m. The message came from my Aunt Linda. "Good morning, sweetheart. Hope you're already heading to the airport. We can't wait to celebrate together. Don't forget your passport." She finished the message with 3 heart emojis. Anyone else would have thought it was affectionate. I knew better. Linda never asked questions because she cared. She asked questions to confirm information she already possessed. I placed the phone face down on my kitchen counter without replying. Outside my apartment, Seattle was still waking beneath a blanket of pale gray clouds. Rain decorated the windows in tiny patterns while the city lights reflected across Elliott Bay. Normally, I loved mornings like this. Quiet. Predictable. Controlled. But something felt different. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was exhaustion. Or maybe after years of pretending not to notice, my heart had finally grown tired of making excuses for people who never intended to love me equally. My name is Evelyn Harper. I'm 37 years old. Officially, I'm Executive Director of International Partnerships at Northbridge Hospitality Group. Unofficially, I'm the invisible person responsible for making impossible things happen. Luxury resorts, private aviation agreements, corporate travel partnerships, international event planning. When wealthy families wanted the impossible arranged discreetly, my team made it happen. Ironically, my own family had absolutely no idea what I actually did. That wasn't an accident. Years ago, I stopped trying to explain. Whenever I mentioned work, my mother would interrupt. "Oh, that's nice, dear. Anyway, your cousin Olivia just bought another investment property." Or, "Your brother Daniel is finally thinking about opening his own business." Or, Family is more important than careers. Eventually, I learned silence was easier. The wedding in Italy should have been different. My cousin Sophie was marrying Alessandro Romano, whose family owned one of Tuscany's oldest luxury estates. I'd first met Alessandro's parents 6 years earlier, while negotiating an international hospitality partnership. Back then, I was only a senior manager. His mother, Isabella Romano, had looked at me after our first meeting and smiled. "You negotiate with kindness," she'd said. "Most people negotiate with fear." Over the years, we became close friends. Not because of business, because we respected each other. When Sophie called me 8 months before the wedding, she was crying so hard I could barely understand her. "Evelyn, I don't think we can afford this anymore." She explained everything. Construction delays, unexpected medical bills, canceled family savings. Her parents insisted they could only contribute a tiny amount. She was ready to cancel everything. I listened quietly. Then I said the only sentence that felt natural. "Leave it with me." She protested immediately. "No, absolutely not. I can't ask you." "You didn't. But just marry the man you love." She cried harder. That night, I contacted Isabella Romano. Less than 24 hours later, everything had changed. The Romano family quietly upgraded the venue. My company covered international logistics through executive partnership credits. Luxury suites became complimentary. Airport transfers disappeared from invoices. Business class airfare was approved through our corporate incentive program. Every flower, every reservation, every bottle served during the reception, every welcome gift, every limousine, every private vineyard tour. Everything had one invisible signature. Mine. I never told anyone. Not even Sophie knew the full truth. She believed generous sponsors had helped. In reality, there was only one sponsor. As I finished packing that morning, I carefully wrapped a bottle of 20-year-old Brunello wine inside a soft cashmere scarf. It wasn't expensive because of its price. It was valuable because Isabella herself had given it to me after closing our first international agreement. "For the day your heart finally feels appreciated," she'd said. I'd saved it for 6 years. I thought Sophie's wedding would finally be that day. I couldn't have been more wrong. By 6:40 a.m., my driver pulled into Seattle, Tacoma International Airport. The terminal buzzed with sleepy travelers dragging luggage across polished floors. I checked in quickly. Everything looked perfect. Seat 3A. Business class. Exactly as planned. I settled near gate C-17 with black coffee and opened my laptop. Emails. Contracts. Vendor confirmations. Everything was routine. Until I saw them. My parents. My Aunt Linda. My Uncle Frank. My younger brother Daniel. His wife Melissa. 2 family friends. 8 travelers. All laughing. All wearing clothes they'd proudly told neighbors were for their luxury Italian vacation. The vacation they believed had somehow appeared through luck. Not one of them had ever asked who arranged it. My mother spotted me first. She waved casually. "There she is." Everyone turned. Smiles appeared. The same smiles that always arrived whenever they needed something. For a brief moment, I almost convinced myself things would be different. Then an old memory surfaced. Christmas 4 years earlier. I'd secretly paid off my parents' overdue mortgage. $160,000. I never expected applause. I expected one sentence. Thank you. Instead, while my brother unwrapped the sports car keys they'd bought him with money I had quietly replaced, my mother handed me a scented candle worth maybe $15. She smiled proudly. We know you don't really need gifts. Everyone laughed. I laughed too. Not because it was funny, because pretending hurt less than explaining. That morning at Gate C17, looking at them across the terminal, I realized something. People don't suddenly become cruel. They simply stop pretending to be kind once they believe you'll never leave. And for the first time in my life, I was finally ready to walk away. My mother walked toward me with the same confident smile she'd worn for years whenever other people were watching. Evelyn, she said warmly, kissing the air beside my cheek instead of actually hugging me. You made it. I did. My father nodded without looking up from his phone. Traffic wasn't bad? No. He grunted as though that completed our conversation. Daniel slapped me lightly on the shoulder. Big sis, ready for Italy? I've been ready for months. He laughed without understanding what I'd meant. Melissa admired the designer luggage lined neatly beside our group. I still can't believe we're flying business class. Linda smiled proudly. I told everyone this family deserves a little luxury. I looked at the matching luggage. I recognized every suitcase. I had purchased 6 of them myself during a corporate outlet event nearly 3 years earlier because my parents had mentioned wanting something nice for future vacations. Not one of them remembered where they came from. That no longer surprised me. What surprised me was Sophie. She still hadn't arrived. I checked my phone. A message waited. Landing in 20 minutes. Can't wait to hug you. I smiled despite myself. Sophie had always been different. She never demanded. Never compared. Never made me feel invisible. If anyone deserved happiness, it was her. That was why I had agreed to shoulder everything. Not for my parents. Not for appearances. For her. A loud laugh interrupted my thoughts. Linda had gathered 2 elderly women nearby into conversation. Our family has always traveled well, she was saying proudly. We've worked very hard. I nearly laughed. Worked hard. Interesting choice of words. Over the past decade, I'd quietly paid for more than half of every family vacation. Cruises. Resort stays. Holiday cabins. Anniversary dinners. Medical emergencies. Home repairs. Daniel's failed business loan. My father's truck. Even Melissa's graduate tuition after Daniel confessed they couldn't afford another semester. Each payment came with the same promise. We'll pay you back. They never did. I stopped asking. Not because I didn't need the money. Because asking made them uncomfortable. Apparently my comfort had never mattered nearly as much. At 7:02 a.m., boarding preparations began. The airline staff rolled new scanners toward the counter. Business class passengers would board first. Daniel stretched confidently. I could get used to this. Melissa laughed. So could I. Linda leaned toward my mother. You know, once people experience luxury, they never want economy again. Mother smiled proudly. I suppose that's true. I looked down into my coffee. None of them noticed my silence. None of them ever really had. A familiar voice interrupted everything. Evelyn. I turned. Sophie hurried toward us, pulling a single carry-on suitcase. Her hair was tied into a loose braid, and despite obvious exhaustion, she looked happier than I'd seen her in years. Before anyone else reached me, she wrapped both arms around me. You came. Of course I came. She stepped back. I was so worried something would happen. I smiled gently. Nothing could keep me away. If only I'd known. She hugged everyone else before lowering her voice. I still can't believe this wedding is actually happening. It'll be perfect, I assured her. I hope so. Her eyes glistened. I never thanked you properly. You don't need to. Yes, I do. She squeezed my hand. You've done more for me than anyone realizes. Linda interrupted before I could answer. Come on, sweetheart. She slipped an arm around Sophie. We should take a family picture before boarding. They gathered together naturally. My mother, father, Daniel, Melissa, Linda, Frank, the family friends, Sophie. Everyone instinctively found a place. No one noticed there wasn't one left for me. The airport photographer smiled. Everyone ready? I quietly stepped aside. Click. The flash reflected against the terminal windows. No one called me over. No one realized. Or perhaps they did. The photographer handed my mother the camera. Beautiful family. She beamed. Thank you. I watched from several feet away. Then my phone buzzed. Isabella Romano. Good morning, Evelyn. Safe travels. The family cannot wait to welcome you home. Home. That single word warmed me more than anything my own relatives had said all morning. Another message followed immediately. The courtyard has been prepared exactly as requested. We have one surprise planned for Friday evening. Please don't let anyone convince you to arrive late. I frowned. A surprise? Isabella rarely spoke in riddles. If she mentioned something personally, it mattered. Before I could reply, boarding announcements echoed through the terminal. Passengers traveling in business class may now approach the gate. Our group stood together. The airline agent scanned boarding passes one by one. Melissa. Approved. Daniel. Approved. Frank. Approved. Linda. Approved. My parents. Approved. Everyone crossed through the gate smiling. I was last. I handed over my passport. The young airline employee scanned my boarding pass. Her cheerful expression disappeared. She scanned it again. Then once more. I'm terribly sorry. She looked confused. Could you wait just one moment? She disappeared toward another computer. My mother turned around. What now? The employee returned 30 seconds later. Miss Harper. Her voice had become noticeably quieter. I'm afraid your reservation has been canceled. For a heartbeat, the entire terminal became silent. I don't understand, I said calmly. It shows cancellation at the executive account level approximately 8 minutes ago. 8 minutes. Exactly when my family had gathered for photographs. My mother slowly folded her arms. Then she smiled. Not kindly. Coldly. Oh dear. She sighed dramatically. What terrible timing. Daniel looked uncomfortable, but said nothing. Melissa avoided my eyes completely. Linda stepped closer. You know, Evelyn, perhaps this is a sign. A sign? You've always worked too much. She shrugged. Maybe you should stay home. My father finally spoke. Honestly. He looked almost relieved. You'd probably just spend the whole trip checking emails anyway. Then came the sentence that would stay with me forever. My mother looked directly into my eyes and spoke loudly enough for dozens of strangers to hear. Have fun finding your own way home. A young couple standing nearby froze. Even the airline employee looked horrified. My father shook his head. Know your place for once. Linda chuckled. We can't hold everyone back. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it again. Not one person defended me. Not one. Years of sacrifice. Reduced to public entertainment. Oddly, I didn't feel anger. I felt something far more dangerous. Peace. The kind that arrives only after hope finally dies. Without saying another word, I reached into my handbag, unlocked my phone, scrolled to one contact. Victoria Ellis, Chief Operations Officer, Northbridge Hospitality Group. She answered before the second ring. Evelyn? My executive travel privileges. Yes. I watched my family laughing as they prepared to board. Then I spoke quietly. Cancel every corporate benefit attached to Reservation Group Hawthorne. There was no hesitation. No questions asked? No. Victoria's voice became calm. It'll take less than 10 minutes. I thanked her, ended the call, and walked away from the boarding counter without looking back. For the first time in years, I wasn't trying to save my family. I was finally saving myself. I stood beside the wide terminal windows, watching aircraft taxi across the rain-soaked runway. Behind me, I could hear my family's laughter. It sounded distant. Not because they were far away. Because something inside me had finally gone quiet. For years I had imagined this moment differently. I thought if they ever crossed the line, I would cry. Or yell. Or demand answers. Instead, I simply watched the rain. Less than 2 minutes later, my phone vibrated. Victoria Ellis. Done. Her voice was as calm as ever. Every executive travel authorization attached to Reservation Group Hawthorne has been revoked. Thank you. I also secured another flight for you. I frowned. You already did? I had a feeling something like this might happen. That made me smile faintly. Victoria had worked beside me for almost 8 years. She knew my family only through scattered stories. Yet somehow, she understood them better than I had. What flight? North Bridge's European executive partner. She typed for a moment. Private lounge access immediately. Departure at 9:45. First class. Seat 2A. My personal account? No. She laughed softly. The company president insisted. I blinked. What? He reviewed your travel authorization last night. He said if our best partnership director ever needed help getting to Italy, the company would gladly invest another ticket. For the first time that morning, I laughed. A real laugh. Tell him I'll reimburse every dollar. He already refused. Silence settled between us. Then Victoria spoke more gently. Evelyn. Yes? I've watched you save everyone else for nearly a decade. Another pause. It's okay if today you save yourself. My throat tightened. Not because of sadness. Because someone had finally said exactly what I needed to hear. Thank you. One more thing. What? Don't reverse the cancellations. I wasn't planning to. I'm glad. The call ended. I slipped the phone into my blazer pocket. Behind me, boarding continued. The loudspeaker echoed across the terminal. Final business class boarding. A few seconds later, confused voices began rising from the gate. I didn't turn around immediately. I already knew what was happening. Another announcement interrupted the terminal. Attention passengers traveling under reservation group Hawthorne. The airline supervisor walked toward my family carrying a tablet. Unlike the younger gate agent earlier, this woman looked nervous. Very nervous. She stopped directly in front of my parents. I'm terribly sorry. There has been an update regarding your reservations. My mother frowned. What kind of update? The supervisor inhaled carefully. Your executive travel privileges have been withdrawn. Daniel blinked. I'm sorry, what does that mean? It means your business class upgrades no longer exist. Melissa stared blankly. What? The supervisor continued reading. The discounted accommodation package connected to your travel authorization has also been canceled. My father laughed awkwardly. There must be some mistake. I'm afraid not. She checked her tablet again. The authorization holder personally revoked every corporate benefit approximately 7 minutes ago. Silence. Linda forced a smile. Well, I'm sure whoever arranged it can fix it. They already confirmed the cancellation. My mother's face slowly lost color. Our hotel? The executive partnership no longer applies. The airport transfers? Canceled. The welcome reception? No longer included. Daniel stared at the screen. How much are regular tickets? The supervisor hesitated. Because you're booking on the day of departure. She looked uncomfortable. Approximately $4,000 per person. Nobody spoke. 8 travelers. Over $30,000. Immediately. Linda laughed nervously. That's ridiculous. I'm sorry. It isn't our pricing. My father finally asked the obvious question. Who authorized all this? The supervisor looked directly at her tablet. The executive account holder. And who exactly is that? She read without emotion. Ms. Evelyn Harper. Every head turned toward me. I remained standing beside the window. Calm. Quiet. Almost peaceful. Mother looked genuinely confused. No, she whispered. That can't be right. Linda shook her head repeatedly. There has to be another Evelyn. There isn't. The supervisor rotated her tablet. Across the top appeared my corporate profile. Executive Director, International Partnerships, Northbridge Hospitality Group, Primary Authorization Holder. Daniel's eyes widened. You? He looked from the screen to me, then back again. You arranged all this? I met his gaze. Yes. His mouth opened. No words came out. Melissa covered her mouth. Frank stared at the floor. The two family friends exchanged bewildered glances. One of them quietly asked my father, "You told us your wife handled everything." My father didn't answer. Because he couldn't. For years, they hadn't asked, and I'd never volunteered. The truth had simply existed. Invisible. Mother hurried toward me. Evelyn. Her voice had completely changed. Soft. Gentle. Almost pleading. My mother walked toward me with the same confident smile she'd worn for years whenever other people were watching. Evelyn, she said warmly, kissing the air beside my cheek instead of actually hugging me. You made it. I did. My father nodded without looking up from his phone. Traffic wasn't bad? No. He grunted as though that completed our conversation. Daniel slapped me lightly on the shoulder. Big sis, ready for Italy? I've been ready for months. He laughed without understanding what I'd meant. Melissa admired the designer luggage lined neatly beside our group. I still can't believe we're flying business class. Linda smiled proudly. I told everyone this family deserves a little luxury. I looked at the matching luggage. I recognized every suitcase. I had purchased 6 of them myself during a corporate outlet event nearly 3 years earlier, because my parents had mentioned wanting something nice for future vacations. Not one of them remembered where they came from. That no longer surprised me. What surprised me was Sophie. She still hadn't arrived. I checked my phone. A message waited. Landing in 20 minutes. Can't wait to hug you. Shats. I smiled despite myself. Sophie had always been different. She never demanded. Never compared. Never made me feel invisible. If anyone deserved happiness, it was her. That was why I had agreed to shoulder everything. Not for my parents. Not for appearances. For her. A loud laugh interrupted my thoughts. Linda had gathered 2 elderly women nearby into conversation. Our family has always traveled well, she was saying proudly. We've worked very hard. I nearly laughed. Worked hard. Interesting choice of words. Over the past decade, I'd quietly paid for more than half of every family vacation. Cruises. Resort stays. Holiday cabins. Anniversary dinners. Medical emergencies. Home repairs. Daniel's failed business loan. My father's truck. Even Melissa's graduate tuition after Daniel confessed they couldn't afford another semester. Each payment came with the same promise. We'll pay you back. They never did. I stopped asking. Not because I didn't need the money. Because asking made them uncomfortable. Apparently my comfort had never mattered nearly as much. At 7:02 a.m., boarding preparations began. The airline staff rolled new scanners toward the counter. Business class passengers would board first. Daniel stretched confidently. I could get used to this. Melissa laughed. So could I. Linda leaned toward my mother. You know, once people experience luxury, they never want economy again. Mother smiled proudly. I suppose that's true. I looked down into my coffee. None of them noticed my silence. None of them ever really had. A familiar voice interrupted everything. Evelyn. I turned. Sophie hurried toward us, pulling a single carry-on suitcase. Her hair was tied into a loose braid, and despite obvious exhaustion, she looked happier than I'd seen her in years. Before anyone else reached me, she wrapped both arms around me. You came. Of course I came. She stepped back. I was so worried something would happen. I smiled gently. Nothing could keep me away. If only I'd known. She hugged everyone else before lowering her voice. I still can't believe this wedding is actually happening. It'll be perfect, I assured her. I hope so. Her eyes glistened. I never thanked you properly. You don't need to. Yes, I do. There must be some misunderstanding. No misunderstanding. You canceled everything? I revoked my company benefits. But her expression shifted from confusion to panic. What about the wedding? You'll have to make your own arrangements. Linda suddenly stepped forward. Evelyn. She forced the warm smile she'd perfected over decades. We're family. Exactly. So why would you embarrass us? I looked directly into her eyes. No, Aunt Linda. You embarrassed yourselves. She froze. The words landed harder than I'd intended. Father finally approached. His shoulders seemed smaller somehow. You didn't have to do this, I answered quietly. I also didn't have to pay for any of it. Complete silence. Around us, strangers pretended not to listen. None of them succeeded. Mother swallowed hard. You paid? Everything. The flights? Yes. The hotel? Yes. The transportation? Yes. The welcome dinner? Yes. The vineyard tours. The reception arrangements. The executive reservations. The travel insurance. The upgrades. Everything. Daniel whispered. I thought... I know. You thought Mom arranged it. Nobody corrected him. Because nobody could. Years of assumptions collapsed inside less than 60 seconds. Mother looked like someone trying desperately to remember hundreds of forgotten conversations. Small comments. Ignored phone calls. Business trips. Late nights. Transfers she'd never questioned. Suddenly, they all meant something different. Her eyes filled with uncertainty. Not guilt. Not yet. Just realization. The dangerous first step toward truth. My phone vibrated again. Another message from Victoria. Your new boarding pass is active. Executive lounge access ready. Safe travels, Evelyn. I smiled. Then looked at my family one last time. I hope Sophie has the wedding she deserves. Mother reached toward my arm. Evelyn, wait. I stepped back. Not dramatically. Just enough. For years, I had always been the one closing the distance. Today, I finally let it remain. Without another word, I picked up my carry-on and walked toward the executive lounge. Behind me, I heard my mother call my name. Twice. Then 3 times. For the first time since childhood. I kept walking. And I never looked back. I stepped into the executive lounge, and the heavy glass doors closed behind me with a quiet hiss. The noise from the terminal disappeared instantly. Soft piano music floated through the room. Fresh coffee filled the air. Business travelers spoke in hushed voices while overlooking the rain-covered runway. For the first time that morning, I could breathe. A receptionist smiled as I approached. Good morning, Miss Harper. She handed me a fresh boarding pass. Your flight has been confirmed. I glanced down. Flight 918, Seattle, Milan, first class, seat 2A. She continued politely. Our company received instructions to make your journey as comfortable as possible. I thanked her and found a quiet seat beside the windows. Before I could even open my laptop, my phone began vibrating. Mother. Decline. 2 seconds later. Father. Decline. Then Linda. Decline. Daniel. Decline. Within 5 minutes. 23 missed calls. 7 voice messages. Dozens of text messages. The first one came from my mother. Evelyn, please answer. There has been a misunderstanding. The second arrived 30 seconds later. Call me immediately. Then another. We're family. I stared at the screen for several seconds before locking it again. Family. That word had always seemed to appear only after they needed something. Never before. Another vibration. This time, it was Sophie. My heart tightened. I answered immediately. Evelyn? Her voice sounded anxious. Mom says something happened. It did. Are you okay? I looked out at the runway. I will be. There was a long silence. Then she spoke carefully. Nobody will tell me what's actually going on. Because they can't. What does that mean? I hesitated. She deserved honesty. But not over the phone. I'll explain everything when I see you in Italy. Another pause. Are you still coming? I smiled. Nothing could stop me. She exhaled with relief. I knew it. What? I knew you wouldn't disappear. Her voice softened. I've always trusted you more than anyone. Those words struck harder than she realized. For years, I'd wondered whether anything I'd done had mattered. Maybe. It had. At least to one person. I'll see you Friday. I'll be waiting. The call ended. Minutes later, another call came through. Victoria. They're trying everything. I smiled faintly. I assumed they would. They've already asked the airline manager to reverse the cancellations. And? He politely refused. I leaned back. What else? They called our corporate office. I blinked. They what? Victoria laughed. Your mother introduced herself as your supervisor. I couldn't help smiling. My supervisor? Apparently. What happened? Our receptionist transferred her directly to the CEO. I nearly dropped my coffee. Seriously? Seriously. What did he say? Victoria's laughter grew louder. He simply asked one question. What? Has Evelyn approved this request? And? When your mother answered no. He wished her a pleasant day and ended the call. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Victoria became serious. There's something else. What? The Romano estate contacted us. My attention sharpened. Is everything all right? More than all right. They're upgrading your accommodations. I already have a suite. Not anymore. What do you mean? They've moved you. To where? The owner's villa. I stared out the window. The owner's. Yes. They specifically requested that no one else be allowed access without your permission. I frowned. That's unnecessary. I don't think they agree. She paused. Evelyn. I've never heard Isabella Romano make a request like this. My curiosity deepened. Something was happening in Italy. Something I didn't yet understand. Before I could ask another question, a familiar voice interrupted behind me. Excuse me. I turned. The elderly gentleman who had witnessed everything at gate C-17 stood beside my chair. He wore a charcoal suit and carried a leather briefcase. I hope I'm not disturbing you. Not at all. He smiled kindly. I was at your gate earlier. I know. I wanted to tell you something. He hesitated. I lost my daughter 12 years ago. I'm sorry. So am I. He looked toward the runway before continuing. Watching your family this morning. His voice grew quiet. I kept wondering how anyone could fail to recognize someone like you. Emotion tightened my throat. He continued. My daughter spent her entire life trying to earn love from people who only appreciated what she gave them. He smiled sadly. She never realized love isn't something you should have to purchase. I felt my eyes sting. He extended a business card. My name is Richard Bennett. I run a children's education foundation. I don't know why, but I have a feeling we'll meet again. I accepted the card. Thank you. He nodded once, then quietly walked away. I looked down at the simple white card. No flashy logo. No impressive title. Just a name. And a small sentence underneath. Changing lives one opportunity at a time. I slipped it into my wallet. Some encounters lasted minutes, yet stayed with you forever. At exactly 9:10 a.m., boarding for my new flight was announced. I gathered my belongings. As I reached the lounge exit, my phone buzzed one final time. This message wasn't from my family. It was from Isabella Romano. My dear Evelyn, the vineyard knows everything. You are not arriving as a guest. You are arriving as family. We'll be waiting. I read the message twice, then smiled. Outside those lounge doors, one family had finally shown me exactly where I stood. Across the ocean, another family was already preparing a place where I truly belonged. As I stepped toward the boarding gate, I realized something I should have understood years earlier. The people who deserve your kindness never make you beg for their respect. And sometimes, the family you choose becomes the one that finally chooses you back. The flight lifted through thick gray clouds, leaving Seattle hidden beneath a blanket of rain. I watched the city disappear until there was nothing left except white sky and endless blue beyond it. It felt strangely symbolic. For years, I had carried my family on my shoulders. Now, for the first time, I was leaving that weight behind. The flight attendant placed a glass of sparkling water beside me. "Can I bring you anything else, Miss Harper?" I smiled politely. "Just coffee, please." "Of course." She returned a few moments later with fresh coffee and a warm croissant. I hadn't realized how hungry I was. Stress had a way of replacing hunger with numbness. Across the aisle, passengers settled into quiet conversations, movies, or sleep. I opened my laptop, intending to review contracts. Instead, my inbox exploded. 47 unread emails. Most were routine. 3 weren't. The first came from Victoria. Subject: Update. The airline has officially confirmed that your family purchased economy tickets for tomorrow's flight. They will arrive in Italy almost 24 hours later than originally planned. I leaned back. They would miss the welcome dinner. They would miss the estate tour. They would miss every private event that had been arranged months in advance. Not because I wanted revenge. Because executive reservations disappear the moment executive privileges disappear. Actions have consequences. Sometimes expensive ones. The second email came from Northbridge's CEO. Subject: Proud of you. It contained only 3 sentences. Victoria informed me what happened. You handled yourself with extraordinary professionalism. Take all the time you need. Your position will be waiting when you return. I stared at the screen for several seconds. In 12 years of working at Northbridge, I had never asked the company for anything personal. Yet they had quietly protected me without hesitation. Respect. That was what genuine leadership looked like. Not control. Respect. The third email made me pause. It came from Isabella Romano. Attached was a seating chart for Friday night's welcome banquet. I opened the document. The head table seated 12 people. Bride, groom, parents, grandparents, estate owners. Then my eyes stopped. Evelyn Harper, guest of honor. I blinked. Surely that was a mistake. I immediately called Isabella. She answered on the first ring. My dear Evelyn. Isabella. I just saw the seating chart. Yes? I think someone made an error. She laughed warmly. No. My place is with the other guests. No. I arranged logistics. You arranged much more than logistics. I don't need recognition. Her voice softened. That is exactly why you deserve it. I fell silent. She continued. When Alessandro asked where you should sit, I asked him one question. What question? Who made this wedding possible? I closed my eyes. She answered it herself. You did. So you will sit beside our family. Before I could protest again, she changed the subject. Tell me honestly, how are you feeling? I looked through the aircraft window. I don't know. You are grieving. I didn't lose anyone, she answered gently. Sometimes we grieve people who are still alive. Those words settled deep inside me. Because they were true. I wasn't mourning my parents. I was mourning the family I'd spent 37 years believing they could become. That family had never existed. Only the hope had. When we ended the call, I didn't reopen my laptop. Instead, I closed my eyes. Memories surfaced one after another. My 10th birthday. Daniel had wanted a bicycle. My parents said money was tight. A week later, they bought him one anyway. Mine never came. College graduation. My father left early because Daniel had a baseball game. Mother promised we'd celebrate later. We never did. My first promotion. I invited everyone to dinner. Only Sophie arrived. She brought flowers from a grocery store because she couldn't afford anything else. She apologized for the cheap bouquet. I still had the dried flowers pressed inside one of my books. Not because they were beautiful. Because someone had remembered. My thoughts were interrupted by another vibration. This time, it was Daniel. Not a call. A message. Can we talk? I stared at it. Several minutes later, another arrived. I honestly didn't know. Another. I'm sorry, I read every word. Then locked the phone without replying. An apology sent because the truth was exposed. Wasn't the same as an apology born from understanding. If he truly regretted his actions, time would prove it, not text messages. The flight crossed into the Atlantic as afternoon sunlight filled the cabin. Passengers slept. The engines hummed steadily. For the first time in years, my mind wasn't occupied with solving someone else's crisis. No unpaid bills. No emergency loans. No last-minute reservations. No excuses. Just silence. Peaceful, unfamiliar silence. Hours later, the captain announced our descent into Milan. Golden sunlight stretched across the Italian countryside below. Rolling vineyards. Ancient villages. Stone farmhouses. It looked exactly as I remembered. Only this time, I wasn't arriving as someone trying to earn acceptance. I was arriving as myself. When the aircraft door opened, warm spring air rushed inside. Italy smelled like olive trees, fresh earth, and possibility. Inside the arrivals hall, a man in a tailored navy suit stood holding a wooden sign. Ms. Evelyn Harper. The moment he saw me, he smiled warmly. Welcome back, Signora Harper. Thank you. I'm Matteo. I've been asked to bring you directly to Villa Romano. He took my suitcase before I could object. As we walked toward the black luxury sedan waiting outside, I noticed another vehicle parked nearby. Its doors displayed the Romano family crest. Matteo noticed me looking. They insisted on sending 2 cars. 2? He nodded. 1 for you. And 1 for your luggage. I laughed softly. That seems excessive. He smiled. Signora Isabella disagrees. As we drove through northern Italy, vineyards stretched endlessly beneath the afternoon sun. Matteo drove confidently along winding country roads. After nearly 2 hours, my phone buzzed once more. A message from Sophie. Mom keeps asking where you are. A second followed immediately. I told her you'll arrive when you're ready. Then a third. I can't wait to see you. I smiled. No manipulation. No guilt. No demands. Just genuine excitement. Maybe. That was what family was supposed to feel like. As the hills of Tuscany appeared on the horizon, Matteo slowed the car. There, he said quietly. I looked ahead. Villa Romano stood proudly above the vineyards, glowing beneath the evening sun. Stone walls. Ancient cypress trees. Blooming gardens. It looked less like a hotel, and more like a place where generations had carefully protected every memory. Matteo smiled. Welcome home, Miss Harper. For reasons I couldn't explain. Hearing those words from a stranger felt more comforting than hearing them from my own parents ever had. And waiting beyond those gates was a truth that would change not only my family's future, but my own forever. Villa Romano looked even more breathtaking than I remembered. Golden evening light spilled across endless vineyards, painting the rolling hills in shades of amber and green. Ancient cypress trees lined the stone driveway, and fountains shimmered quietly in the center of the courtyard. As Matteo opened the car door, I stepped onto the cobblestone path. Before I could even reach for my suitcase, the front doors opened. Isabella Romano walked down the steps herself. She wasn't wearing formal clothes. No expensive jewelry. No elegant evening gown. Just a simple cream sweater, dark trousers, and the warm smile that had greeted me every time I'd visited over the past 6 years. Evelyn. She didn't stop at shaking my hand. She wrapped both arms around me. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then she gently pulled back and looked into my eyes. You've been carrying too much. The words caught me completely off guard. I forced a smile. I've had worse weeks. She shook her head. No. I don't mean this week. I mean the last 10 years. I stared at her. She somehow understood without needing an explanation. She linked her arm through mine and led me toward the villa. Come? You must be exhausted. Inside, the familiar scent of polished oak, fresh bread, and lavender welcomed me. The staff greeted me like an old friend. Several even remembered my name. Not because of my position, because over the years I'd learned theirs. That mattered here. As we entered the main sitting room, I noticed fresh white lilies arranged beside the fireplace. They're beautiful. Isabella smiled. I remembered they're your favorite. I blinked. I mentioned that once. You mentioned it 4 years ago. She laughed softly. When someone matters, you remember. Her sentence lingered in my mind. My own mother couldn't remember my birthday without checking her calendar. Yet Isabella remembered flowers I'd casually mentioned years earlier. The comparison hurt more than I expected. A housekeeper entered carrying tea and pastries. "Thank you, Sophia," Isabella said warmly. After the woman left, Isabella turned serious. I received several calls. My heart sank. "From my family?" She nodded. "This afternoon." "What did they want?" "They wanted your room." I looked at her, confused. My room? They introduced themselves as immediate family. She folded her hands calmly. "They said there had been a mistake." I sighed. "I'm sorry." She smiled gently. "There is nothing for you to apologize for." "What did you tell them?" "I told them the truth." "And that was?" She looked directly into my eyes. "I told them Villa Romano does not move honored guests." I couldn't help smiling. "You actually said that?" "I did." "And your mother's sister became, how do Americans say?" She searched for the phrase. "Very upset." I laughed for the first time all day. "That sounds like Aunt Linda." "Oh." I suspected as much. She poured fresh tea before continuing. "Evelyn, there is something else." Her tone changed. More serious. "The board wishes to thank you tomorrow evening." I frowned. "The board?" "Our hospitality council." "What for?" She looked genuinely surprised. "For 6 years of loyalty." I shook my head. "I was only doing my job." "No. You protected our reputation in America. You introduced our vineyards to buyers who respected tradition. You refused commissions from competitors. You stood beside us during difficult harvests." She leaned forward. "That is not only a job." I suddenly understood why she'd insisted I arrive early. None of this was about Sophie's wedding. They had planned something entirely different. Before I could ask another question, footsteps echoed in the hallway. A familiar voice called happily, "Evelyn!" I turned. Sophie hurried into the room wearing jeans, sneakers, and a loose white sweater. Without hesitation, she hugged me tightly. "I knew you'd come." "I promised." She laughed through tears. "Mom kept saying you weren't coming." I stopped listening. She stepped back. "I've missed you." "I missed you too." She looked toward Isabella. "Can I steal her for a little while?" Isabella smiled. "She belongs to herself." "I merely borrowed her." The three of us laughed. Sophie led me outside onto the terrace overlooking the vineyards. The evening breeze carried the scent of rosemary and fresh grapes. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she sighed. "My mom has been strange." "In what way?" "She keeps asking questions." "What kind?" "About you." My expression remained calm. "Like what?" "How long you've known the Romanos." "What your job actually is." "Why everyone here already knows your name." I looked across the vineyards. "Interesting." Sophie frowned. "Did something happen at the airport?" I considered lying. Instead, I asked quietly, "What exactly did they tell you?" She looked embarrassed. "They said, you canceled because work became more important." I smiled sadly. And do you believe that? She answered immediately. No. Never. I've known you my entire life. You always show up. Those words meant more than she realized. She hesitated before speaking again. Evelyn, I need to ask something. Anything. Were you really the one who arranged all of this? I stayed silent. Her eyes slowly widened. Oh my God. It was you. You don't have to answer. Her expression alone told me she already understood. The flights. The hotel. The dinners. I gave a small nod. She covered her mouth. I thought. I know. You thought generous sponsors helped. She whispered. There weren't any sponsors. I smiled gently. There was one. Tears immediately filled her eyes. She shook her head over and over. Why didn't you tell me? Because this wedding wasn't about me. It was about giving you the day you deserved. She suddenly hugged me again. This time much tighter. I don't deserve you. I rested my chin lightly against her hair. No. You deserve happiness. And that's enough. Unknown to either of us. Standing behind the open terrace doors. Someone had heard every word. Isabella. She quietly turned away without interrupting. A few minutes later, she picked up her phone. She made one short call. Prepare tomorrow night's dinner. She paused. And move Miss Harper's seat. The voice on the other end asked a question. Isabella smiled. Yes. Place her beside me. From now on, everyone should know exactly who she is. The next morning, sunlight poured through the tall windows of Villa Romano, turning the stone walls a warm shade of gold. For a moment, I forgot everything that had happened at the airport. No ringing phone. No accusations. No pressure to solve someone else's problems. Only birds singing somewhere beyond the gardens, and the distant sound of workers beginning another day in the vineyards. I couldn't remember the last time I'd woken up feeling peaceful. A gentle knock interrupted my thoughts. Come in. The door opened slowly. A young housekeeper entered carrying a breakfast tray. Fresh fruit. Warm pastries. Italian coffee. Orange juice. And a small white envelope resting beside a single white rose. She smiled. Good morning, Signora Harper. Signora Isabella asked me to bring this personally. Thank you. After she left, I picked up the envelope. Inside was a handwritten note. Good morning, Evelyn. Today is not about repaying kindness. Today is about allowing others to appreciate yours. Please join us in the East Garden at 10. No business, no speeches, just family. Isabella. I smiled. No business. Those two words felt almost unfamiliar. For years, every vacation had become another opportunity for someone to ask for help. Alone. A reservation. A recommendation. A favor. Maybe today would truly be different. At exactly 10 o'clock, I walked through the gardens. Rows of lavender lined the pathways. Ancient olive trees cast long shadows across the stone walkways. The morning air smelled of fresh bread and blooming jasmine. Near the fountain stood Isabella and Alessandro. When they saw me, both smiled warmly. "There she is," Alessandro said. "The woman everyone has been waiting for." I laughed. "I think you're exaggerating." "Not at all." He shook my hand warmly. "If anything, we've been waiting 6 years." We sat beneath a large oak tree overlooking the vineyards. For several minutes, nobody mentioned business. Instead, we spoke about books, travel, music, childhood memories, simple conversations. Conversations where nobody expected anything from me. It felt refreshing. Eventually, Alessandro leaned back in his chair. "I've wanted to ask you something." "What is it?" "Why do you hide?" I looked at him, surprised. "I don't understand." "You've built partnerships across 3 continents. Our family trusts you completely. Your company speaks about you as though you're irreplaceable." He paused. "But whenever your family is mentioned, you disappear." His words were gentle, not judgmental, just honest. I looked down at my coffee. I suppose I never wanted anyone to think success changed me. Isabella reached across the table and placed her hand lightly over mine. "Evelyn, success didn't change you. It revealed everyone else." Silence settled over the table. Not awkward, thoughtful. For years I'd blamed myself. Maybe I worked too much. Maybe I wasn't warm enough. Maybe I should have called more often, visited more frequently, given a little more. Today, for the first time, I wondered if I'd been asking the wrong questions. Later that afternoon, Sophie found me walking through the vineyard. She looked nervous. "Can we talk?" "Always." She took a deep breath. "My mother knows." I guessed. "She's been asking everyone questions since this morning." "What kind of questions?" "About the flights, the hotel, the reception, the money." She looked embarrassed. She finally realized none of it came from our parents. I sighed quietly. I never wanted this to become an issue. It already has. She looked toward the distant hills. "My mom cried." That surprised me. "Cried?" Sophie nodded. "I've never seen her like that." "What happened?" "One of the estate managers thanked her for having a cousin as generous as you." She smiled sadly. My mother couldn't answer. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Then Sophie asked softly, "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." "When I was 12, you bought me my first sketchbook." I smiled. "I remember." "You probably don't remember what you wrote inside." She reached into her handbag. Carefully, she removed an old notebook. The corners were worn. The pages had yellowed with time. Inside the front cover, written in blue ink, were words I had completely forgotten. "Never let anyone convince you that your dreams are too expensive. The world always makes room for people brave enough to create something beautiful. Evelyn." I stared at the page. "I wrote that?" "You did." "I've carried it ever since." She looked at me with tears in her eyes. "You've spent your whole life believing nobody noticed what you did." She gently closed the notebook. But you changed mine. Emotion tightened my throat. Perhaps kindness really was like planting trees. You rarely sat beneath their shade yourself. But one day, someone else did. That evening, preparations for the welcome banquet filled the estate with excitement. Florists hurried through the halls. Musicians rehearsed near the courtyard. Chefs worked in the outdoor kitchens. Guests from across Europe began arriving. Luxury cars rolled through the front gates, one after another. Around sunset, Isabella appeared outside my room. "Wear the blue dress." I looked up. "The navy one?" She smiled knowingly. "Trust me." An hour later, I stood in front of the mirror wearing the elegant navy gown I'd packed almost as an afterthought. Simple. Classic. Nothing flashy. Just the way I preferred. A soft knock sounded again. When I opened the door, Isabella looked at me for several seconds before smiling proudly. Perfect. Together we walked toward the grand courtyard. As we approached, conversation slowly faded. Dozens of guests had already gathered beneath glowing lanterns. Business leaders, estate owners, international partners, close family friends. Many of them recognized me immediately. One after another, they crossed the courtyard. "Evelyn, it's wonderful to see you again. How have you been? We've missed working with you." Several greeted me with hugs. Others shook my hand warmly. I noticed something from the corner of my eye. Near the entrance, my parents had just arrived. Their economy flight had landed only an hour earlier, and after a long drive from Florence, they looked exhausted. My mother stopped walking. My father slowly removed his glasses. Daniel stared silently across the courtyard. They weren't looking at the decorations. They weren't looking at the musicians. They were looking at me. They watched influential guests, respected executives, and longtime friends lining up simply to welcome me. Not because of my money. Not because of my title. Because they genuinely respected me. For the first time in their lives, they were seeing me through other people's eyes. And judging by the expressions on their faces, they barely recognized the daughter they thought they had always known. The evening had only just begun. And before the night was over, they would discover that the greatest surprise waiting at Villa Romano had never been the wedding. It was the woman they had spent years overlooking. The courtyard glowed beneath hundreds of warm lanterns suspended between ancient olive trees. A string quartet played softly near the fountain, while waiters carried silver trays filled with sparkling drinks and handmade appetizers. Every detail reflected elegance without extravagance. It wasn't about displaying wealth. It was about celebrating family. The irony wasn't lost on me. I stood beside Isabella greeting guests one after another. Some were hotel owners from France. Others were vineyard managers from Spain. Several represented luxury travel companies I'd partnered with over the years. Each conversation was genuine. No pretenses. No competition. Just mutual respect. Across the courtyard, I noticed my parents standing awkwardly near the entrance. No one recognized them. No one rushed over to welcome them. They had expected the attention that usually came from being associated with successful people. Instead, they found themselves quietly blending into the crowd. Linda whispered something to my mother while looking in my direction. Mother nodded slowly. Neither approached me. Not yet. Daniel looked different. Unlike the others, he wasn't staring at the decorations. He was watching every interaction I had. Every handshake. Every smile. Every conversation. Piece by piece, the image he'd carried of me his entire life was falling apart. A familiar laugh echoed across the courtyard. Evelyn! I turned to see Richard Bennett walking toward me. The gentleman from the airport. He wore a tailored navy tuxedo and looked completely at ease among the international guests. I smiled warmly. I wasn't expecting to see you here. He chuckled. Neither was I. What brings you to Tuscany? The Romano Foundation. He gestured toward Isabella. They've supported our scholarship program for years. I looked surprised. I didn't know that. There are many things people don't advertise. He smiled knowingly. True generosity rarely does. Isabella joined us. Richard. My dear Isabella. The two embraced warmly. Richard turned toward me. I hope I'm not interrupting. Not at all. He looked around the courtyard. I've been watching. I noticed. He smiled. Your family seems confused. I couldn't help laughing. That's one way to describe it. His expression softened. I hope you know something. What? People who constantly give rarely realize how much they're worth. They become so accustomed to serving others that they forget their own value. His words settled quietly inside me. Before I could respond, Alessandro climbed the small stone platform beside the fountain. He tapped his glass lightly. The conversation slowly faded. Ladies and gentlemen, his voice carried effortlessly through the courtyard. Before we celebrate tomorrow's wedding, I would like to recognize someone. My stomach tightened. Oh no. I looked toward Isabella. She smiled innocently. She knew exactly what was happening. Alessandro continued. 6 years ago, our estate nearly lost an important partnership. A young executive traveled halfway around the world. She worked 18-hour days. She refused personal bonuses. She solved problems nobody else believed could be solved. Several guests nodded knowingly. Since then, she has become more than a business partner. She has become family. Every instinct told me to disappear. Instead, I remained exactly where I stood. Alessandro extended his hand toward me. Evelyn, would you join me? 100 pairs of eyes turned in my direction, including my family's. Slowly, I walked toward the platform. When I reached him, Alessandro smiled. You always dislike attention. I whispered. You have no idea. He laughed quietly before facing the guests again. There is something many of you don't know. This week's wedding would never have happened without Evelyn Harper. A wave of surprised murmurs swept through the courtyard. My parents froze. Alessandro continued. When unexpected financial difficulties threatened everything, she quietly stepped in. Not for recognition, not for applause, but because she believed two people deserved the chance to begin their lives together. He looked toward Sophie and then back at the guests. Every international arrangement. The travel planning. The hospitality coordination. The welcome events. The logistics. Were made possible through her generosity. He paused. And she asked for one thing. I closed my eyes. Please don't say it. Don't let anyone know it came from me. The courtyard became completely silent. Several guests looked toward me with admiration. Others began applauding. Within seconds, the applause spread through the entire estate. People stood. Not because I was wealthy, not because of my title, because they respected quiet kindness. I glanced toward my parents. Mother's eyes filled with tears. Father stood motionless. Linda looked as though someone had taken away her ability to speak. Daniel lowered his head. For the first time in years, no one was looking at me as the quiet daughter who simply handled everything. They were seeing the truth. When the applause finally faded, Alessandro stepped aside. He handed me the microphone. I looked at it as though it belonged to someone else. I wasn't prepared to speak. Several guests laughed gently. I took a slow breath. When I agreed to help, I never imagined standing here. My hope was simple. That two people who truly loved each other would begin their marriage without carrying unnecessary burdens. I looked toward Sophie. She was crying openly now. I've learned something over the years. Kindness doesn't become smaller when it's shared. It becomes stronger. She refused personal bonuses. She solved problems nobody else believed could be solved. Several guests nodded knowingly. Since then, she has become more than a business partner. She has become family. Every instinct told me to disappear. Instead, I remained exactly where I stood. Alessandro extended his hand toward me. Evelyn, would you join me? 100 pairs of eyes turned in my direction, including my family's. Slowly, I walked toward the platform. When I reached him, Alessandro smiled. You always dislike attention. I whispered, You have no idea. He laughed quietly before facing the guests again. There is something many of you don't know. This week's wedding would never have happened without Evelyn Harper. A wave of surprised murmurs swept through the courtyard. My parents froze. Alessandro continued. When unexpected financial difficulties threatened everything, she quietly stepped in. Not for recognition, not for applause, but because she believed two people deserved the chance to begin their lives together. He looked toward Sophie and then back at the guests. Every international arrangement, the travel planning, the hospitality coordination, the welcome events, the logistics, were made possible through her generosity. He paused. And she asked for one thing. I closed my eyes. Please don't say it. Don't let anyone know it came from me. The courtyard became completely silent. Several guests looked toward me with admiration. Others began applauding. Within seconds, the applause spread through the entire estate. People stood. Not because I was wealthy, not because of my title, because they respected quiet kindness. I glanced toward my parents. Mother's eyes filled with tears. Father stood motionless. Linda looked as though someone had taken away her ability to speak. Daniel lowered his head. For the first time in years, no one was looking at me as the quiet daughter who simply handled everything. They were seeing the truth. When the applause finally faded, Alessandro stepped aside. He handed me the microphone. I looked at it as though it belonged to someone else. I wasn't prepared to speak. Several guests laughed gently. I took a slow breath. When I agreed to help, I never imagined standing here. My hope was simple: that two people who truly loved each other would begin their marriage without carrying unnecessary burdens. I looked towards Sophie. She was crying openly now. I've learned something over the years. Kindness doesn't become smaller when it's shared. It becomes stronger. It inspires other people to be kind as well. I smiled softly. So if you wish to thank anyone... I looked toward Isabella and Alessandro. Thank the people who taught me generosity by living it every day. The applause returned, even louder than before. I stepped away from the microphone as quickly as I could. Isabella hugged me tightly. You handled that beautifully. I nearly fainted. She laughed. I noticed. Dinner began beneath the lanterns. As promised, my seat was beside Isabella. Across from me sat Richard Bennett. To my surprise, an empty chair remained directly beside me. I assumed it belonged to another guest. Instead, halfway through the first course, someone quietly approached. May I? I looked up. Daniel. He held his plate awkwardly. His confidence had disappeared. I glanced toward Isabella. She gave a tiny approving nod. I gestured to the empty chair. Sit. He lowered himself slowly. For nearly a minute, neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered, I don't know where to begin. You don't have to. No. His voice cracked. I do. He looked down at his untouched dinner. I spent my whole life believing I was the one everyone depended on. He laughed bitterly. It turns out, I was depending on you. I stayed silent. Not because I was angry. Because this conversation deserved honesty. Daniel swallowed hard. When Dad's business failed, you paid the bank. I found the documents this afternoon. I looked at him, surprised. You found them? Mom was searching through old papers. His eyes filled with regret. Your name was on every transfer. He continued quietly. My first business loan. My wedding. My car after the accident. Melissa's tuition. Our house deposit. He shook his head. I thought Mom and Dad had saved us every time. A painful smile crossed his face. It was always you. He finally looked at me. I don't expect forgiveness tonight. I just needed you to know that I finally understand. Before I could answer, a voice echoed from the far end of the courtyard. Evelyn. Everyone turned. My mother was walking toward us, and judging by the tears in her eyes, the next few minutes were about to change everything. My mother stopped a few feet from our table. The music continued softly in the background, but every conversation around the courtyard faded into silence. She looked different. Not because of her elegant dress. Not because she'd obviously been crying. Because for the first time in my life, she looked uncertain. She clasped her hands together as though rehearsing what she wanted to say. Evelyn. Her voice trembled. May we talk? I looked at Isabella. She gave me a reassuring smile. This is your choice. Not an obligation. A choice. That single difference mattered. I stood slowly. We can talk. Mother nodded gratefully. Somewhere private? I glanced toward the rose garden beyond the courtyard. There. We walked in silence beneath rows of lanterns until the music became distant. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, she stopped beside an old stone fountain. I owe you an apology. I waited. Not because I wanted to punish her. Because I wanted to know whether she truly understood. She took a shaky breath. I've been trying to remember. Remember what? When I stopped seeing you. The question caught me off guard. She stared into the water. When you were little, you followed me everywhere. You loved helping me bake. You'd bring me flowers from the yard. A sad smile crossed her face. You were always trying to make everyone happy. She wiped a tear from her cheek. And somewhere along the way, I started expecting it. Silence. I stopped thanking you. I stopped asking how you were. I assumed you'd always be fine. Those words hurt because they were true. People rarely worried about the strongest person in the room. They simply assumed strength never became tired. Mother continued quietly. When Daniel struggled, you helped. When your father lost work, you helped. When your aunt needed money, you helped. She looked directly at me. And instead of asking whether you needed help, I kept asking for more. A tear slipped down her face. I'm ashamed. I didn't answer immediately. Not because I lacked words. Because honesty deserved careful timing. Finally, I spoke. Do you remember my 35th birthday? She frowned slightly. No. I didn't think so. Her expression crumbled. It was the day after Daniel's promotion party. I smiled sadly. You called me 3 days later. You apologized because you'd forgotten. She covered her mouth. Oh. I remember now. I was embarrassed. You said we'd celebrate later. I nodded. We never did. She closed her eyes. I know. Do you remember the Christmas when I paid off the mortgage? She stared at me. That was you? Yes. I never wanted anyone to know. She leaned against the fountain as though her legs suddenly felt weak. I thought... I know. You thought Dad refinanced. She whispered. My God. Another long silence settled between us. Then she asked the question she'd been avoiding. Why? What? Why didn't you ever tell us? I smiled gently. Because I wasn't helping to be admired. I was helping because I loved you. Fresh tears rolled down her cheeks. And we treated your love like an obligation. I didn't disagree. because she was finally saying the truth herself. She reached carefully toward my hand. This time, I didn't step away. "I can't change 30 years," she whispered. "But if you'll let me, I'd like the chance to become a better mother." Before I could answer, footsteps approached behind us. "Father?" He looked older than he had 2 days earlier. Not physically. Emotionally. He removed his glasses before speaking. "I've spent my entire life believing I was protecting this family." His voice cracked. "It turns out you were protecting all of us." I looked at him quietly. "When my construction company nearly went bankrupt, I told everyone I'd found a private investor." He shook his head. "I found the paperwork today." His eyes filled with regret. "There never was an investor. There was only you." I remembered that winter. He'd looked exhausted, proud, broken. I'd arranged the transfer through an anonymous business trust because I knew he'd refuse charity. He had accepted it, simply because he hadn't known it came from me. "I thought preserving your dignity mattered," I said softly. He laughed bitterly. "You preserved mine. I destroyed yours." His honesty surprised me. For years he'd defended every decision. Tonight, he wasn't defending anything. He stepped closer. "I can't ask you to forgive me. I haven't earned that. But I need you to know I've never been more disappointed in myself." The words hung between us. Real. Painful. Uncomfortable. Exactly what truth often sounded like. Just then, Daniel and Melissa quietly joined us. Neither interrupted. Daniel looked toward our parents. "I told her everything." Mother nodded. "We know." Melissa stepped forward. "Evelyn, I owe you an apology too." She wiped away tears. "When Daniel and I couldn't afford graduate school, I complained that your wedding gift wasn't expensive enough." I barely remembered the conversation. She remembered every word. "I didn't know. You were paying my tuition." She laughed through tears. "I actually complained about the wrapping paper." I couldn't help smiling. "I remember. I've wanted to disappear ever since Daniel showed me the receipts." She looked down. "I've judged you without ever knowing you." For the first time, our entire family stood together. Not pretending. Not competing. Just facing the consequences of years of unspoken truth. Then my father asked quietly, "Can we ever become a family again?" I looked around the garden. At the people who had raised me. The people who had hurt me. The people who finally seemed willing to face themselves honestly. Forgiveness wasn't impossible. But neither was it immediate. "I don't know," I answered truthfully. "But I know this." They all listened. Trust isn't rebuilt with apologies. It's rebuilt with choices. Small ones. Consistent ones. Over time. Nobody argued. Because everyone understood. Mother nodded slowly. "We'll wait. As long as it takes." At that moment, Isabella appeared at the entrance to the garden. She smiled warmly. "I'm sorry to interrupt. The bride is looking for all of you." Sophie came running behind her. "There you are." She laughed through happy tears. "I've been searching everywhere." She looked around at our family, then paused. "What happened?" Mother smiled weakly. "The first honest conversation we've had in years." Sophie looked at me. I gave her a small nod. "Hope. Not certainty. Just hope." She smiled. "Then maybe tomorrow will be about more than a wedding." As we walked back toward the glowing courtyard together, none of us realized that someone standing across the terrace had quietly photographed the entire scene. By sunrise, that single photograph would spread across social media, and it would bring an unexpected visitor to Villa Romano. Someone whose arrival would change my future in ways none of us could have imagined. The wedding morning arrived beneath a cloudless Tuscan sky. Golden sunlight rolled gently across the vineyards, touching every row of grapevines with a warm glow. The estate buzzed with quiet excitement. Florists made final adjustments to the ceremony arch, while musicians tuned their instruments near the chapel. For everyone else, it was a wedding day. For me, it felt like the beginning of a life I hadn't known was possible. I stood on the balcony outside my room with a cup of coffee when my phone buzzed. "Victoria." "Good morning." "You sound happier." I smiled. "I think I finally slept." "I'm glad." She hesitated. "There's something you should know." "What happened?" "A photograph from last night's banquet is everywhere." I frowned. "What photograph?" "The one where your family was standing together in the rose garden." "I didn't even know anyone took it." Apparently, one of the European hospitality magazines covered the welcome banquet. She paused. "The article isn't really about the wedding. It's about you." I laughed softly. "That doesn't sound possible." "I'll send the link." A few seconds later, my phone vibrated. The headline read, "The executive who quietly changed hundreds of lives refuses public recognition." Beneath it was the photograph. I looked almost uncomfortable standing beside my parents while Isabella rested a hand on my shoulder. The article mentioned years of international charity work, business partnerships, scholarship donations, anonymous community projects. I blinked in surprise. I hadn't known half of those had become public. The article ended with one sentence. "Some people measure success by what they own. Others measure it by the lives they quietly improve." I closed the page. "Who wrote this?" Victoria answered. "Richard Bennett." "The gentleman from the airport?" "The very same." I smiled. "He certainly works quickly." "He also requested a meeting." My eyebrows lifted. "With me?" "This afternoon." I thought he was only attending the wedding. So did I. She laughed. "I have a feeling there's more to him than a children's foundation." After ending the call, I walked downstairs. The estate was alive with laughter. Staff members hurried across the courtyard, carrying flowers and candles. Guests admired the vineyards, while photographers prepared equipment near the chapel. As I entered the breakfast room, conversations suddenly paused. Not awkwardly. Warmly. Several guests smiled. One elderly woman stood and hugged me. I read the article. "You've reminded us that kindness still exists." Another guest shook my hand. You've inspired my wife and me to start a scholarship in our hometown. I felt embarrassed. I really haven't done anything extraordinary. Richard's familiar voice came from behind me. That's exactly why extraordinary people rarely recognize themselves. I turned to see him carrying 2 cups of coffee. May I join you? Of course. We found a quiet table overlooking the gardens. For several moments, we simply watched guests walking between the flower beds. Finally, Richard spoke. I wasn't completely honest yesterday. I smiled. I suspected as much. My foundation is only part of what I do. What else? I recently retired after 38 years. Doing what? I founded Bennett International Hotels. I nearly spilled my coffee. The company owned luxury properties across Europe and North America. I'd negotiated with them twice. Never once had I met the founder. You... He laughed. I usually let my children handle public appearances. I prefer listening. Everything suddenly made sense. His observations. His calm confidence. The respect others showed him. Richard folded his hands. I've spent years searching for someone. What kind of someone? A leader. I frowned. You already have executives. I have managers. He smiled. I'm looking for someone with character. Silence settled between us. Then he slid a folder across the table. Inside was a proposal. Executive partner. Global community development. The salary alone exceeded anything I'd ever earned. I slowly looked up. Richard, I'm not asking for an answer today. I'm asking you to consider building something that lasts beyond business. What exactly? He leaned forward. We build hotels. But I'd rather build opportunities. He explained that every new property funded schools, scholarships, and local training programs. He wanted someone who understood both hospitality and compassion. Someone who could lead with integrity instead of ego. I've interviewed dozens of candidates. He smiled warmly. Then I watched you at the airport. I learned everything I needed to know. I looked down at the folder. For years I'd chased promotions. Now, someone was offering purpose. Before I could respond, applause erupted outside. The ceremony was beginning. Richard stood. The job can wait. He straightened his jacket. Today belongs to your cousin. As we walked toward the gardens together, I noticed my family already seated. Mother spotted me first. Instead of waving me over impatiently, she stood. She waited. When I reached her, she smiled gently. We saved you a seat. Not at the end of the row. Not behind everyone else. Beside them. It was a small gesture. But sometimes, the smallest changes reveal the biggest transformations. I sat down quietly. Father leaned over. You look happy. I am. He nodded. I'm glad. No awkward speeches. No forced apologies. Just 2 simple sentences. Maybe that was how healing actually began. One honest moment at a time. As the music started and Sophie appeared at the end of the flower-lined aisle, every guest rose to their feet. She looked radiant, confident, peaceful. Our eyes met briefly. She smiled, then mouthed two words. "Thank you," I smiled back. But deep inside, I realized something. The greatest gift I'd given Sophie had never been the wedding. It was believing in her future, long before she believed in it herself. And before the ceremony ended, another unexpected announcement would leave every guest speechless. The chapel fell completely silent as Sophie reached the altar. The late morning sun streamed through the ancient stained-glass windows, bathing the room in soft shades of gold, blue, and crimson. Fresh white roses lined the aisle, filling the air with their delicate fragrance. Every guest stood. Alessandro couldn't take his eyes off his bride. He looked as though nothing else in the world existed. Sophie reached him, and for a brief moment, neither of them spoke. They simply smiled. It was the kind of smile that needed no words. The officiant welcomed everyone before beginning the ceremony. "We gather today not simply to celebrate a marriage, but to honor two people who chose love over fear." Those words echoed through the chapel. Without realizing it, I glanced toward my parents. My mother lowered her eyes. Perhaps she understood why those words mattered. Love was never supposed to depend on usefulness. The ceremony continued beautifully. There were moments of laughter when Alessandro struggled to pronounce one of Sophie's middle names. There were tears when Sophie's grandfather shared a blessing that had been passed through 4 generations. Even the musicians became emotional during the vows. When Sophie promised, "I will always choose honesty, even when honesty is difficult," I felt a lump form in my throat. Honesty had nearly destroyed my family. Yet somehow, it had also become the first step toward healing it. When they exchanged rings, applause filled the chapel. The officiant smiled broadly. "By the authority entrusted to me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Alessandro kissed Sophie as cheers echoed through the ancient stone walls. Outside, church bells rang across the Tuscan hills. Guests poured into the gardens laughing, embracing, and celebrating. Photographers hurried everyone toward the vineyard for family portraits. "Immediate family first," one photographer called. Almost instinctively, I stepped backward. Old habits. For years, I had quietly removed myself from family photographs whenever space became limited. I assumed someone else belonged there more than I did. Just as I was about to move aside, Sophie reached for my hand. "Where are you going?" "I'll wait." She smiled. "No." She gently pulled me beside her. "You stay here." The photographer arranged everyone carefully. Parents, grandparents, bride, groom. Then he looked at me. "And you?" Before I could answer, Sophie spoke firmly. "She's staying." The photographer nodded. "Perfect." Click. The camera flashed. Then another. And another. For the first time in years, I wasn't standing outside the picture. I was part of it. As guests moved toward the reception gardens, Isabella quietly approached the photographer. "I have one request." "Of course." "I'd like another portrait." "Who should be in it?" She looked toward me. "Our family." The photographer smiled. Within minutes, Isabella, Alessandro, several members of the Romano family, and me stood together beneath an enormous olive tree. He counted. 3, 2, 1. Flash. A simple photograph. Yet somehow, it felt like the first family portrait I'd ever truly belonged in. The reception began beneath a canopy of white flowers overlooking the vineyards. Long wooden tables stretched across the gardens. Crystal glasses sparkled beneath the afternoon sunlight. Laughter drifted through the warm breeze. As guests found their seats, I noticed another surprise. Every place card had been handwritten. Mine simply read, Evelyn, no title, no company, no achievements, just my name. For some reason, that meant more than any executive title ever could. During lunch, conversations flowed easily. Richard Bennett shared stories about opening his first hotel with only 12 employees. Isabella teased Alessandro about the disastrous meal he'd attempted to cook when he was 19. Everyone laughed. Then Richard looked toward me. Evelyn, I've been thinking. That's usually dangerous. The table laughed. It often is. He smiled. I'd like to make an announcement later. I looked puzzled. What kind? You'll see. Before I could ask another question, the master of ceremonies tapped his microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, as tradition requires, it is time for those closest to the couple to offer a few words. One by one, people stood. Sophie's father spoke first. His voice trembled with emotion as he welcomed Alessandro into the family. Alessandro's mother followed, speaking about patience, partnership, and choosing kindness every day. Then the master of ceremonies looked toward me. Our next speaker is someone without whom this wedding would never have taken place. I immediately shook my head. No. Sophie laughed. Yes. The guests applauded encouragingly. Reluctantly, I stood and walked toward the microphone. I looked across the sea of smiling faces. For a moment, words refused to come. Finally, I smiled. When I first met Alessandro, I realized something immediately. He looked at Sophie the same way every person hopes to be seen. Not for what she owned, not for what she could provide, but simply because she was herself. I glanced toward the newlyweds. That kind of love is rare. It deserves protecting. The crowd listened quietly. I've spent many years believing that love meant sacrificing until there was nothing left to give. I paused. I was wrong. A few guests exchanged thoughtful glances. Real love doesn't ask you to disappear. It encourages you to become more fully yourself. I smiled toward Sophie. My wish for both of you is that neither of you ever feels invisible. The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was heartfelt. As I stepped away from the microphone, Sophie hugged me tightly. That was the most beautiful speech today. I laughed. Please don't tell your father. As dessert was served, Richard quietly stood from his chair. He walked toward the stage, carrying a small envelope. The room gradually became silent. I've attended many weddings. He began. But today, I've witnessed something much greater than a celebration. He looked toward me. I've witnessed the quiet influence of one extraordinary woman. I immediately wished I could disappear beneath the table. Richard smiled. Don't worry. This won't take long. Several guests laughed. He continued. Yesterday I offered Evelyn a position. I looked up in surprise. He hadn't planned to mention that publicly. I told her to think about it. He held up the envelope. But after speaking with my board this morning, we've decided to make one small change. The room became completely still. Richard opened the envelope. The position is no longer executive partner. He smiled warmly. It's now Chief Executive Officer of Global Community Development. A wave of astonished whispers swept through the reception. Even I sat frozen. Richard looked directly at me. The position is yours, if you choose to accept it. Across the table, my parents stared at me in complete disbelief. And for the second time in less than 3 days, they realized the daughter they had overlooked had just been offered a future greater than any of them had ever imagined. Richard's words seemed to freeze time. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Even the musicians, who had been preparing for the next performance, lowered their instruments. I looked from Richard to the envelope in his hand, then back again. I'm sorry, I said quietly. I think I heard you incorrectly. He smiled. I don't believe you did. A ripple of gentle laughter spread across the guests. I've spent the last 24 hours speaking with our board. They unanimously approved one recommendation. He paused. Mine. I stood slowly. Richard, I've never managed an organization that large. He nodded. I know. I've never asked to lead one. I know. I've never even applied. His smile widened. I know. The guests laughed softly again. Richard became serious. Titles can be taught. Leadership cannot. You've been leading your entire life. You simply never demanded recognition for it. Silence settled across the courtyard. He continued. I've watched executives chase promotions. I've watched investors chase profit. I've watched talented people spend decades protecting their reputations. He looked directly into my eyes. You spent 10 years protecting people who rarely thanked you. And you never became bitter. His words hit harder than I expected. Because there had been moments, many moments, when bitterness would have been easier. Richard slowly walked toward me. He handed me the envelope. Inside was a single page. No complicated contract. No legal language. Just one sentence. We believe character is the greatest qualification for leadership. Signed beneath it were 12 board members. I looked up. You all agreed? Richard smiled. Not immediately. What changed their minds? I showed them security footage. I blinked. Security footage? From the airport. My eyes widened. The airport? He nodded. Your family publicly embarrassed you. You never raised your voice. You never insulted anyone. You quietly accepted responsibility for your own dignity. He paused. Then, you removed privileges you had personally provided. Nothing more. Nothing less. He folded his hands. That isn't revenge. That's accountability. Several guests nodded thoughtfully. Across the reception, my father remained completely still. Daniel quietly leaned toward him. Dad, I think we never really knew her. Father answered without taking his eyes off me. No. We only knew what was convenient. Mother wiped away another tear. Each new truth seemed to reveal another piece of the daughter they'd never bothered to understand. Richard continued speaking. There's another reason. He gestured toward Isabella. When I called the Romano family, I expected a professional reference. Instead, he laughed. I received 23 minutes of stories. Isabella smiled proudly. I may have spoken a little too much. Richard laughed. A little? You practically refused to let me end the call. The courtyard erupted with warm laughter. He looked back at me. She didn't tell me about your contracts. She didn't mention your revenue. She never discussed business. She told me how you stayed beside her husband all night after his surgery. I looked toward Isabella. She smiled softly. You never told anyone. Richard continued. She told me how you secretly paid wages for seasonal workers during a difficult harvest. Another memory surfaced. The vineyard had nearly closed one winter after severe frost destroyed an entire crop. Families had depended on those jobs. Helping had felt obvious. Richard wasn't finished. She also told me about the village school. I laughed quietly. Please don't. Oh, I absolutely will. He turned toward the guests. The local elementary school lost funding 3 years ago. Someone anonymously paid for new computers, library books, heating repairs. He looked back at me. Guess who? I covered my face briefly. This is becoming very embarrassing. The guests laughed. Richard smiled kindly. Only because you've hidden kindness for so long. Sophie suddenly stood. I want to tell one story. Everyone looked toward her. When I was 16, I wanted to quit school. I looked at her in surprise. I'd forgotten that conversation. My grades were terrible. I thought I wasn't smart enough. She smiled through tears. Evelyn drove 4 hours after work, just to have dinner with me. She stayed until midnight, then drove home because she had an early meeting the next morning. She looked at me. You didn't lecture me. You didn't criticize me. You simply asked one question. She smiled. Who told you that failure gets the final vote? I remembered. Barely. Sophie continued. I graduated because of that conversation. I became a designer because of that conversation. I met Alessandro because I attended university. She wiped away tears. So, if anyone thanks Evelyn today, they're actually thanking the reason my life turned out the way it did. The applause that followed lasted nearly a full minute. When it finally quieted, Richard spoke again. I believe celebrations should leave something meaningful behind. He reached into his jacket. This morning, our board voted to establish something new. He unfolded another document. The Harper Initiative. I stared at him. The what? A scholarship and leadership program. He smiled. It will support young women entering hospitality, business, and international relations. I felt completely speechless. Richard continued. It will operate in 12 countries, and every graduate will receive one reminder. He looked directly at me. The world doesn't need louder leaders. It needs kinder ones. Many guests stood once again. This applause felt different. Not celebratory. Hopeful. As everyone slowly returned to their seats, Richard leaned toward me and whispered, "You still haven't answered my offer." I smiled. "I haven't had time." "You don't have to decide today." He looked toward the vineyards. "But promise me something." "What?" "Whatever you choose. Don't spend another decade making yourself smaller just to keep other people comfortable." I looked across the reception. My parents. Daniel. Melissa. Sophie. The Romano family. For the first time, I wasn't wondering who expected something from me. I was wondering what I truly wanted. That question felt unfamiliar, almost frightening, because for 37 years, every major decision I'd made had begun with the same thought. How can I help everyone else? For the first time in my life, a different question quietly formed in my heart. What kind of life would make me happy? I didn't know the answer yet. But for the first time, I was finally ready to find it, for the first time in years. I wasn't thinking about deadlines. I wasn't calculating budgets. I wasn't wondering who needed rescuing next. Instead, I sat alone beneath an ancient olive tree, overlooking the vineyards, holding Richard's offer in my hands. The paper wasn't heavy. Yet somehow, it felt like it weighed more than every responsibility I'd carried over the last decade. Footsteps approached quietly across the stone path. Richard smiled as he reached me. "I thought I'd find you here." I needed to think. He nodded. "I guessed." He sat on the bench beside me without saying another word. For several minutes, we simply watched workers moving through the vineyards below. Finally, I broke the silence. "Why me?" Richard smiled. "You're still asking the wrong question." "I am?" "The question isn't why you." He looked toward the horizon. "It's why not you." I laughed softly. "I've spent my entire career avoiding attention." "I know. And now you're offering me one of the most visible positions in the industry." He nodded again. "Exactly." I looked at him. "That doesn't make sense." "It makes perfect sense." He folded his hands. "People who chase power usually shouldn't have it. The people who deserve it usually don't believe they do." His words lingered in my mind. "I've made mistakes." He smiled. "So have I." "I've doubted myself." "So have I." "I've failed." He chuckled. "Welcome to leadership." I couldn't help laughing. For a moment, the decision didn't seem quite so impossible. Richard stood. "I'll be leaving tomorrow morning." "You don't need to answer today." He smiled warmly. "But don't let fear make the decision for you." With that, he quietly walked away. Late that afternoon, I wandered through the vineyards alone. Rows of vines stretched toward the horizon. Workers greeted me with warm smiles as they passed. One elderly groundskeeper tipped his hat. "Good afternoon, Miss Evelyn." "Good afternoon." He hesitated before continuing. "My wife still talks about you." I looked surprised. "I've met your wife?" "3 years ago. You visited our village school." Memory slowly returned. The heating system had broken during winter. Several classrooms had become unusable. "We never properly thanked you." He smiled gently. "My granddaughter graduates from university next month. First person in our family." Emotion tightened my throat. "That's wonderful." "She says she wants to help children." He nodded proudly. "Just like the woman who helped her." As he walked away, I realized something. Kindness had a strange way of traveling farther than we ever imagined. Long after we forgot it, someone else was still living because of it. That evening, the reception slowly transformed into a relaxed family dinner. The formal celebration had ended. Guests sat beneath strings of glowing lights, sharing stories and laughter. For the first time, my parents approached without hesitation. Father carried 2 cups of coffee. "May I?" I smiled. "Of course." He handed me one before sitting beside me. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, he sighed. "I sold the lake house." I looked at him. "What?" "Last month." I didn't know. I didn't tell anyone. He stared into his coffee. "I plan to use the money for retirement." He looked at me quietly. "But I've been thinking." "About what?" "How many years you quietly invested in all of us." He reached into his jacket. A folded envelope rested in his hand. "I've started calculating." "Calculating what?" "Everything you paid." I immediately shook my head. "Dad," he interrupted gently, "please let me finish. I know I can never repay everything. And I know you never expected me to. But every month, I'm going to return what I can." I looked at the envelope without touching it. "You don't owe me anything." He smiled sadly. "Financially? Maybe not. But morally, I owe my daughter the dignity of trying." His voice trembled. "I don't want my final years to be remembered as the years I kept taking. I'd rather they become the years I finally learned how to give." I slowly accepted the envelope. Not because I wanted the money. Because refusing it would deny him the opportunity to change. Sometimes, allowing someone to make things right was also an act of kindness. A little later, Mother found me walking near the fountain. She held a small cardboard box. "I found these." She handed it to me. Inside were dozens of photographs. School pictures, birthday parties, graduations, family vacations. I smiled faintly. "I remember these." She nodded. "So do I." She picked up one photograph. I couldn't have been older than 9 for the first time in years. I wasn't thinking about deadlines. I wasn't calculating budgets. I wasn't wondering who needed rescuing next. Instead, I sat alone beneath an ancient olive tree overlooking the vineyards, holding Richard's offer in my hands. The paper wasn't heavy. Yet somehow, it felt like it weighed more than every responsibility I'd carried over the last decade. Footsteps approached quietly across the stone path. Richard smiled as he reached me. "I thought I'd find you here." I needed to think. He nodded. I guessed. He sat on the bench beside me without saying another word. For several minutes, we simply watched workers moving through the vineyards below. Finally, I broke the silence. "Why me?" Richard smiled. "You're still asking the wrong question." "I am?" "The question isn't why you." He looked toward the horizon. "It's why not you." I laughed softly. "I've spent my entire career avoiding attention." "I know. And now you're offering me one of the most visible positions in the industry." He nodded again. "Exactly." I looked at him. "That doesn't make sense." "It makes perfect sense." He folded his hands. "People who chase power usually shouldn't have it. The people who deserve it usually don't believe they do." His words lingered in my mind. "I've made mistakes." He smiled. "So have I." "I've doubted myself." "So have I." "I've failed." He chuckled. "Welcome to leadership." I couldn't help laughing. For a moment, the decision didn't seem quite so impossible. Richard stood. "I'll be leaving tomorrow morning. You don't need to answer today." He smiled warmly. "But don't let fear make the decision for you." With that, he quietly walked away. Late that afternoon, I wandered through the vineyards alone. Rows of vines stretched toward the horizon. Workers greeted me with warm smiles as they passed. One elderly groundskeeper tipped his hat. "Good afternoon, Miss Evelyn." "Good afternoon." He hesitated before continuing. "My wife still talks about you." I looked surprised. "I've met your wife?" "3 years ago. You visited our village school." Memory slowly returned. The heating system had broken during winter. Several classrooms had become unusable. "We never properly thanked you." He smiled gently. "My granddaughter graduates from university next month. First person in our family." Emotion tightened my throat. "That's wonderful." "She says she wants to help children." He nodded proudly. "Just like the woman who helped her." As he walked away, I realized something. Kindness had a strange way of traveling farther than we ever imagined. Long after we forgot it, someone else was still living because of it. That evening, the reception slowly transformed into a relaxed family dinner. The formal celebration had ended. Guests sat beneath strings of glowing lights, sharing stories and laughter. For the first time, my parents approached without hesitation. Father carried 2 cups of coffee. "May I?" I smiled. "Of course." He handed me one before sitting beside me. For several moments, neither of us spoke. Finally, he sighed. "I sold the lake house." I looked at him. "What?" "Last month." I didn't know. I didn't tell anyone. He stared into his coffee. "I plan to use the money for retirement." He looked at me quietly. "But I've been thinking." "About what?" How many years you quietly invested in all of us. He reached into his jacket. A folded envelope rested in his hand. I've started calculating. Calculating what? Everything you paid. I immediately shook my head. Dad. He interrupted gently. Please let me finish. I know I can never repay everything. And I know you never expected me to. But every month, I'm going to return what I can. I looked at the envelope without touching it. You don't owe me anything. He smiled sadly. Financially? Maybe not. But morally, I owe my daughter the dignity of trying. His voice trembled. I don't want my final years to be remembered as the years I kept taking. I'd rather they become the years I finally learned how to give. I slowly accepted the envelope. Not because I wanted the money, because refusing it would deny him the opportunity to change. Sometimes, allowing someone to make things right was also an act of kindness. A little later, Mother found me walking near the fountain. She held a small cardboard box. I found these. She handed it to me. Inside were dozens of photographs. School pictures. Birthday parties. Graduations. Family vacations. I smiled faintly. I remember these. She nodded. So do I. She picked up one photograph. I couldn't have been older than 9. I was standing proudly beside a homemade birdhouse. I remember this day. She whispered. You worked on that project for weeks. I smiled. You couldn't come to the school exhibition. Fresh tears filled her eyes. I told you your father had an emergency meeting. I remembered. He did. She slowly shook her head. No. He didn't. I looked at her. We simply forgot. The honesty hit harder than any excuse ever could. She wiped another tear away. I've spent 2 days trying to defend myself. I've run out of excuses. She looked directly into my eyes. So today, I'm choosing honesty. I failed you. No explanations. No justifications. Just truth. She reached into the box again. This one belongs to you. It was my university graduation photo. I remembered that day vividly. Only Sophie had attended. What about it? Mother looked ashamed. I found it. Still sealed inside the envelope. My heart sank. You never opened it? She shook her head. I thought I had. Silence settled between us. I didn't even know what I'd missed. She carefully placed the photograph into my hands. I can't get those years back. But if you'll let me, I'd like to stop missing what's still ahead. For several seconds, I simply looked at her. Then I quietly nodded. One step at a time. She smiled through tears. One step at a time. As evening settled over Villa Romano, Sophie found me sitting beneath the same olive tree where Richard and I had spoken earlier. She carried 2 slices of wedding cake. I figured you'd escape here. I laughed. You know me too well. She handed me one plate before sitting beside me. You've been offered an incredible opportunity. I know. So, what are you afraid of? I stared across the vineyards. That I'll fail. She laughed softly. Evelyn, I've watched you solve impossible problems since I was a little girl. You crossed oceans for people who barely noticed. You carried families that weren't even your responsibility. She looked directly at me. The only person you've never believed in is yourself. Those words settled deep inside my heart. For years, I'd measured my worth by how useful I could be to everyone else. Maybe it was finally time to discover who I was, when I wasn't carrying the weight of the entire world. As the sun disappeared behind the Tuscan hills, my phone vibrated. A message from Richard. The offer remains open. Whatever you decide, choose the life that makes you proud when you look in the mirror. I read the message twice, then looked across the endless vineyards glowing beneath the evening sky. For the first time, the future didn't frighten me. It simply waited. And tomorrow morning, I would finally choose it. The following morning arrived wrapped in golden sunlight. A gentle breeze drifted through the vineyards as workers prepared for another peaceful day at Villa Romano. The wedding celebrations had officially ended. Many guests were already packing to return home. Cars waited outside the estate. Suitcases lined the entrance hall. Life was quietly moving forward. I stood on the terrace with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise spread across the Tuscan hills. For the first time in many years, I wasn't wondering what everyone else expected from me. I was asking myself a different question. What kind of life do I want to build? The answer came quietly. A life where kindness wasn't confused with obligation. A life where love wasn't earned through sacrifice. A life where I could give without losing myself. Footsteps approached behind me. Richard. He smiled as he joined me at the railing. So, I suppose you've made your decision. I looked toward the vineyards one last time before turning back to him. I have. He waited patiently. I smiled. I accept. For the first time since we'd met. Richard looked genuinely emotional. I was hoping you'd say that. He extended his hand. Instead of shaking it, I hugged him. He laughed warmly. I suppose that's even better. When we stepped apart, he handed me a leather portfolio. Welcome to the family. I looked at the company logo before smiling. I've always believed hospitality was about making people feel they belonged. Richard nodded. Now you'll help us make sure they actually do. News traveled quickly through Villa Romano. Within an hour, everyone knew. The staff applauded when they saw me. Several hugged me. Matteo grinned proudly. I told everyone you were meant for bigger things. I laughed. I think you gave me too much credit. No. He smiled. I think everyone else gave you too little. Before leaving the estate, my parents asked if we could walk through the vineyard together. Just the three of us. The same paths where I'd spent the last few days finding peace. We walked slowly between the vines. Nobody rushed to fill the silence. Eventually, Father stopped. I've been thinking. He looked toward the hills. I spent years teaching Daniel that providing for a family made someone valuable. He smiled sadly. I never realized. Our daughter had been providing for all of us. He turned toward me. I was proud of the wrong things. I gently placed a hand on his arm. "It's not too late." He nodded. "I know." Mother reached into her handbag. "I have something." She handed me a small velvet box. Inside was a silver bracelet. Simple. Elegant. On the inside, engraved in delicate handwriting, were 6 words. "Thank you for never giving up." Fresh tears filled my eyes. "You didn't have to do this." She smiled softly. "No. We needed to. I've spent years buying gifts for the loudest people in our family." She laughed through tears. "I forgot the quietest one." She fastened the bracelet around my wrist. "I know it doesn't erase anything." "It doesn't," I answered honestly. "But it reminds me you're trying." She nodded. "I'll keep trying." Daniel approached a little later, carrying a folder. "I've started something." "What is it?" He opened the folder. Inside were documents for a scholarship fund. The Evelyn Harper Family Scholarship. I immediately shook my head. "Absolutely not." He laughed. "I knew you'd say that." So I changed the name. He showed me the revised page. "The Second Chance Scholarship, for students whose families can't afford university." He smiled. "I figured. Everyone deserves the kind of second chance our family received." I looked at him proudly. "That's perfect." He hesitated. "I was hoping you'd let me run it. I'd like to spend the next few years helping people instead of impressing them." I smiled. "I think that's a wonderful place to start." Sophie and Alessandro prepared to leave for their honeymoon that afternoon. Before getting into the car, Sophie hugged me tightly. "You know," she smiled, "when I was little, I wanted to grow up to be just like you." I laughed. "I hope not." She looked surprised. "I hope you become even better." She smiled through happy tears. "I'll try." As the car disappeared down the long driveway, Isabella slipped her arm through mine. "You've changed this family." I shook my head. "No. They changed themselves. I simply stopped hiding the truth." Isabella smiled knowingly. "Sometimes truth is the greatest gift we can give." 1 year later, the lobby of Bennett International's new leadership center overlooked the same Tuscan vineyards where everything had changed. Young professionals from more than 20 countries filled the conference hall. Some had grown up in small villages. Others had overcome enormous hardships. Every one of them had received a scholarship through the Harper Initiative. I stood on the stage looking across hundreds of hopeful faces. Richard sat proudly in the front row. Beside him were Isabella and Alessandro. Sophie smiled while holding her 6-month-old daughter. My parents sat quietly beside Daniel and Melissa. Things weren't perfect. Healing had taken time. There had been difficult conversations, missed expectations, careful rebuilding. Trust hadn't returned overnight, but it had returned honestly. And that made all the difference. As I stepped toward the microphone, I noticed something unexpected. My father reached over and gently squeezed my mother's hand. She smiled at him. Then both looked at me with unmistakable pride. Not because of my title. Not because of my success. Simply because I was their daughter. It was the look I'd waited for my entire life. Ironically, I no longer needed it. I smiled at the audience. When I was younger, I believed being loved meant giving people everything they asked for. I thought saying yes made me valuable. I paused, looking around the room. I eventually learned something much more important. Kindness without boundaries becomes exhaustion. Love without respect becomes sacrifice. And generosity without wisdom becomes invisible. The room became completely silent. I smiled. But I also learned something beautiful. When you stop chasing the approval of people who overlook you, you create space for people who truly appreciate your heart. I looked toward my family, then toward the Romano family, then at the hundreds of young leaders sitting before me. Never become afraid of being kind. But never mistake being kind for allowing yourself to be taken for granted. The audience rose to its feet. Applause filled the hall. Richard smiled. Isabella wiped away quiet tears. My parents stood with everyone else. Not because they felt guilty anymore, because they were genuinely proud. As the applause echoed through the building, I looked through the glass walls toward the endless vineyards beyond. 2 years earlier, I had stood in an airport believing I was losing my family. Instead, I had found myself, and in doing so, I discovered something far more valuable than success, recognition, or even forgiveness. The strongest people are not the ones who carry everyone else's burdens forever. The strongest people are the ones who learn that protecting their own peace is not selfish. It's necessary, because the people who truly love you will never ask you to disappear so they can shine. They'll stand beside you and celebrate your light too.